What's up, everybody? Welcome back to another edition of Sit Down Saturday. Today, we're going to be talking about plastics. The quality of plastics, what makes them feel the way they feel, whether or not that means they're inherently of bad quality or good quality, and what all of that means. We're going to talk about ABS a lot. We're going to talk about PLA a little bit. We're going to briefly touch on PVC just for the sake of showing a few different kinds. But most of the stuff that we buy is ABS, so that's where the focus of our conversation is going to be. We're going to talk about how it relates to combiners, how it relates to different companies, etc., etc. It's been a long time coming. It kind of has centered around this whole Magic Square conversation we've been having recently, and it kind of crescendos in that space. So that's the basis for today. Should be a good one. It might be a little heavier on the sciencey stuff, and you know I'm not a science guy. I didn't graduate in the gifted and talented or honors program in my high school, I can guarantee you. So I'm going to talk to you about it in sort of a base layman's terms without getting too caught up in the kind of elements that create the molecules, and I'm just going to kind of speak on it in very kind of general layman's terms. I know Transformers have some really smarty pants fans out there, and they can probably break it down a lot further than I can, but just for the sake of this conversation, that's where we're going to keep it. Base level. And in order to get there, though, we do have to do a little bit of housekeeping. My call, the primitives diagram, a lot of people gave me a lot of love on that, and I appreciate it. Thank you. A lot of people suggested, how about turning them into alt mode? The problem is with that is that they don't. It's a vertical space issue, right? We've talked about this a lot with DTOFs and the dummy stuff. It's a vertical space issue, so the problem is a lot of those alt modes make them even shorter, which is going to make them seem even more inappropriate for that space. But I appreciate, you know, the ideas and stuff, and honestly, I just need properly scaled ones. My wife actually had a good idea of like building larger bases that were removable. You know what I mean? That might fix it, and then when nicer ones come in, I can just take the removable pieces out, which is actually pretty clever. But thank you. Apparently with the Motor Master, there was a part that was mistransformed. Sorry, it didn't stop me from loving the piece. I heard all 35 comments. I appreciate it. Even if you watch the video, I found out at a certain point that the wheels themselves were flipped the other way to begin with. So, you know, live and learn. Still, tremendous piece. Didn't stop my enjoyment or appreciation of it one bit. And I don't even think I mentioned it as a critique because I was sure that the wheels would help fix it anyway, in regard to the final thoughts. And then lastly, the Sit Down Saturday from last week, chomping at the rig. A lot of people had a lot of good comments, a lot of good discussion points within the comment section regarding why the price increase and all that. And look, the truth is for a lot of this stuff, we're shooting in the dark, right? We're kind of trying to make an idea or make a reason or try to explain to ourselves why they would be the way they are. And there was a lot of good ideas there. However, there was one comment that got ridiculous and then went to the boards, and of course when anybody goes to the boards, I get wind of it, and apparently he had some smart comments. Like I saw a couple of them. I didn't take it any kind of way. I got a pretty thick skin. I wasn't offended by anything he said. There's a couple of things that he dropped in there that are kind of local references, like I was drinking too much Natty Boh, which is like a Baltimore drink beer. I appreciated the connections that this dude was trying to make, and I didn't take it out of hate. I thought it was just like breaking balls, you know what I mean? Like I didn't take it any kind of way. But I don't drink Natty Boh. I do all right for myself. I'm a wine guy, plus, if you knew. Getting too old to be drinking all this stuff. I used to get lit, though. I was the lituation. Anyway, he suggested that no company would create combiners without prototypes of everything that we're working. He's just wrong. When that happens, it's the exception to the rule. It's a big deal when that happens. There's very few companies that have done it. Warbitron, I think, was the first to do it, and it was like the shot heard around the world. Like, oh my God, they showed all of it at one point. There's not a world that exists where Fans Toys would have working prototypes for all of these pieces and then have a working combiner for it and not show it. That's not how marketing works. It's not how rollouts work. I don't feel any type of way about what he said, but he's just wrong. That's a fantasy world. That's not reality. The reality is we don't have the 5th Stunticon and we're missing the arms for the Superion, and that's not by accident. That's not circumstantial. We didn't get all of the Stunticons to get Chomp. Something needs some ironing out over there. And I have faith in Fans Toys that they can figure it out. What it's going to cost to figure it out and how that is then distributed upon us might be a whole different conversation. But you know, I'm a defender. They're my favorite company. That's the thing that people confuse about me sometimes, is they think that because they're my favorite company that I give them a pass on stuff when I'm highly critical of them, because I want them to maintain a level of quality that I expect from them. And then other people think that I can't criticize them and then also be an avid fan. Both are possible. But yeah, there's not a working prototype. If there were one, that we would have seen it. A big question that all consumers ask on the third-party front is, I hope the combine mode works. I hope it works. They would show you if it worked. It's a selling point. Anyway, before we get into this, I just want to say the basis for this conversation the Patreon folks already know about was with a person that works with plastics, and we had a conversation that was taped and then put on Patreon. So if you want the kind of full uncut, that's where you got to go for it. And because he kind of meddles around in the business of such, we're going to have some regular conversations from here on out. Conversations that I quite thoroughly enjoy. Shout out to him. I don't want to talk too much about it because it's kind of a Patreon thing, and he agreed to talk on that platform, so he knows who he is. He knows I have love for him, and everybody seems to be enjoying this conversation so far, so thank you to the supporters as well. And with that, I think we can get into this. Once again, just remember, I am not the scientist here. I am trying to explain it to a bunch of normal guys. If you're exceptionally smart, this is probably way beneath you. If you're kind of a regular dude, you might appreciate it. We'll find out. Alright, so let's get into it. Now, basically, when it comes to plastics, there are two major branches. There's dense plastics, and then there are the opposite. Now, when we're talking about toys, we're talking about mainly ABS. However, PLA is a part of it too. We'll get to that here in just a second. But there are other types of plastics that are used for kind of collectibles. PVC being an example of one. And even with PVC, there's two different types, kind of. There's like the kind that's more rigid and then the kind that's more flexible. The flexible kind being more of your vinyl type statues that actually has a layer of plastic kind of added to it within the mold. But the kind of beauty of PVC is that it's cheap, it's easy to deal with, and also due to the more rigid PVC, it's easier to paint because the kind of molecules, the actual plastic itself, doesn't move around as much, so the paint won't chip. It's also a lighter material, so you can have a bigger thing that's actually easier to manipulate, that's more user-friendly, if you will, because of the actual material itself. But we're not really here to talk about PVC. I just wanted to kind of throw an extra thing in there. We're going to talk about PLA really quick. This is the type of plastic that you're seeing in a lot of 3D design. It's polylactic acid, I believe it's called. This is for a number of reasons, but one of the main ones being that it's easier to produce for one, and it melts at a lower temperature, which makes it easier to work with. The actual molecular chains, which we'll get here to in a second, aren't as tightly packed, so it can be flexible, however, it can also be fragile. And another main reason is because a lot of people are using it in 3D printing is mainly because it's not toxic. You can breathe in this stuff and it's not like it's going to kill you like some of this other stuff. So it's a safer material in general to work with. Now, in regard to its melting point, right? So when it gets hot, that's when you can kind of make it do stuff, right? You can bend it to your will, as you will. And as a general rule, the hotter the melting point, the sturdier the cool plastic. So since this melts at a lower temperature, the plastic isn't going to be as sturdy. So it's a trade-off, right? It's your ability to work with it kind of in-house is going to lead to a less durable kind of thing because you're not manufacturing it in a major facility. Does that make sense? But PLA really isn't the main focus of this conversation either. I just wanted to address it because it's becoming more common and it's becoming more prevalent in the kind of collector community. A lot of 3D printed hobbyists, sculptors, artists out there making stuff, and I just wanted to kind of shed light on it for the sake of that. But we're here mainly to talk about ABS, right? We hear it all the time. A lot of times when you go onto retailers' websites and you look at the product descriptions, it'll even say ABS as the material being used. So let's start broader and get in a bit tighter. All plastics are basically a long chain of identical molecules set together in a solid object. What makes one sturdier than another is how long the chains are, meaning one connected chain of molecules, and how tightly the molecules are packed within that chain. Now look, I'm not Bob Nye the science guy, but bear with me. When the molecules are densely packed in a long chain, making them a sturdier piece of plastic, it also makes them less flexible. And within the loss of the flexibility comes proneness to damage. Basically what I'm saying is they snap before they bend. However, with the more flexible plastics, they're trading off durability and sturdiness sometimes. So basically what you end up having is a durability versus flexibility, or a sturdiness versus flexibility. But neither of them necessarily mean they're inherently cheap. You can have high quality plastics that are both flexible and high quality plastics that are both sturdy within the ABS kind of family tree. Now, some of these plastics are going to have filler. Some of these plastics, the chains are all broken to pieces and everything else, and that's when you kind of get into your low-grade knockoff quality plastic. Not the high-grade knockoff quality plastic, but like the kind of real trashy stuff. So let's start in one regard to extremes, real extremes. Let's compare an SH Figuarts to a Marvel Legend. The SH Figuarts plastic is sturdier, it's less gummy, it's harder, it's more rigid, which also allows it to take paint better, like we explained in the PVC portion. Now, there's a number of elements that are associated with that, one of which being the price of materials, but the other of which being production quantities. cheaper plastics hold up better with larger production quantities. So, for instance, when Hasbro is producing a wave of Marvel Legends, they're going to produce far more than when Bandai is producing this Suicide Squad Harley Quinn. Not only is Hasbro producing more with that particular wave, but they're also reusing pieces of that wave over and over and over again. And the more flexible, less dense plastic is going to kind of give itself more to that process than it would to the SH Figuarts process. But we're mainly third-party talkers around here, right? I kind of get into the woods with everything, but on this channel. So let's bring it home to something that we all should know. Let's talk about Fans Toys and we'll talk about Make Toys as just two companies to try to compare pieces to. Now, the Fans Toys plastic is denser, it's sturdier, it's more compact in regards to its molecular chains, which make it feel good in hand, and it makes the plastic feel of high quality, which it is. The take from that is that when you're moving Fans Toys pieces in a transformation, both of those denser plastics are resisting one another rather than giving to one another. This is going to create a couple issues for Fans Toys, one of which can be paint chipping, but another one can be scratches to the actual material, because there's no give. Well, I shouldn't say there's no give. There's not as much give to the molecular density of it. Now let's take Make Toys, for example. It has a bit more give. It has a bit more softness to the plastic. Now you and I both know, if you've handled one, it doesn't feel cheap, but it does feel a little softer than the Fans Toys stuff. But what this does do in terms of transformation process is it allows the pieces to move sort of easier, and if you have a little bit of resistance, one piece can kind of get out of the other piece's way molecularly. I'm talking about on a very small level, so you have less scratches, less issues in regard to paint. However, it doesn't quite feel as good or as sturdy in your hand as the Fans Toys. There's a give and take there. But it's certainly going to give itself more to a user-friendly perspective in regard to transformation. Which brings us to Magic Square. So all of this kind of stuff that we've been talking about in reviews for a while and then bringing up here for a while has led to this point. So breadcrumb trail that I've been leading people down. I've been complaining about Magic Square's materials for some time. It's one of its biggest turnoffs to me. Now, once again, it doesn't mean that it's inherently bad. However, it does cause issues, which we will get to. But let's talk about it for a bit. So they did broadly use nylon with their plastics. I'm guessing it's a nylon blend. And we also find nylon in clothes because it's easy to produce and you can create very long chains that aren't as densely packed but hold together in a sturdy way that allow a lot of flexibility. However, it can be harder to properly and appropriately tolerance the joints due to the give of the softer plastics with the nylon. It's also not going to hold paint as well because of the molecular pieces moving around. So a lot of times I feel like some Magic Square stuff ends up feeling kind of loosey-goosey and sort of flippy-floppy. Loosey-goosey, flippy-floppy. But like we just talked about with Make Toys versus Fans Toys, this is because of the molecular density of something being able to move freely around the other piece that is hitting up against. This isn't an unstoppable force meeting an immovable object. This is a stoppable force meeting a movable object. And as a result, they kind of want to get out of each other's way all the time, and that's what leads to the kind of loosey-goosiness, the flippy-floppiness. However, they're going to be extremely durable. Do you remember when they showed the Inferno with the ladder and they took pliers to the ladder and it didn't hurt it? That's why. So they're going to have a really high playability element and not have any real severe consequences for it. However, if you've been paying attention, they've been switching to just a more straight plastic recently. The Shockwave is an example, the Motormaster is an example, and those first two Stunticons are an example. But those first two Stunticons had some issues in regards to their tolerances. That's because they're not used to working in that medium in the same way. And as a result, those pieces had a hard time kind of getting around each other because they're used to their pieces getting around each other freely. But the pieces are feeling more sturdy and the pieces are feeling better in hand. Now there's a question as to why they were using this material, and it could be that their designers aren't as exact and they wanted a little bit of give with their pieces, so they changed the material in order to kind of fit in. It could be that they knew the material they were working with, so the designers didn't have to be as exact. They could kind of move a bit freer in the space. Or it could be just for the sake of durability. Or it could be cost. But whatever it was, a decision was made and now they're changing, and I think changing for the better. Choosing your materials really comes down to a right tool for the right job. So let's continue. Let's tackle the combiners, for instance. The Fans Toys combiners have a denser plastic, heavier material. It's going to make it more sturdy in some ways, but it's a lot of weight to support. If you take a look at what Zeta and Toy World done, and even DX9 to be be fair, it's a lighter, less dense, longer chain, so that creates the quality, but not as tightly packed, and that creates the flexibility. And as a result, they all support their weight very well. They use the right tool for the right job. Here's another instance where it could become a right tool for the right job scenario, and that is implementing die cast into the process. A softer, longer chain material that's less dense is going to naturally give itself more to the metal pushing up against it, whereas the sturdier sometimes has a more abrasive hit against it. So you can have more wear and tear on the denser rather than the looser. Doesn't mean that either is bad, it's just right tool for the right job. Sometimes it's just a matter of where it's going to be. If you look at the back of Dragstrip's bicep from the Fans Toys piece, it has a piece of die cast added onto it. This helps give you good weight in your hand, and it makes a solid looking figure, solid feeling figure I should say. And it doesn't have to kind of move and squirm around plastic that doesn't have a whole lot of give to it, so it's a smart use of it. Right tool for the right job. Now, whether or not that die cast is going to play a part in the sturdiness of the combiner is a different conversation for a different day. But oftentimes when we see die cast causing looseness in a joint, it has to do with the joint being a denser plastic, where the die cast is literally molecularly removing elements of the plastic over time, and as a result, taking away tension from the joint. So what this really all comes down to is the molecular chains, how long they are without being broken, and then how densely the molecules are packed within continuity. That's what it's all about. And the longer the chain, the higher quality the plastic, the denser, the more sturdy. But you can have less dense high quality, you can have more dense high quality, as long as the chains are long. As long as the chains are long. In some ways, it's like potentially putting yourself in a fully loaded Civic versus a base model Accord. Both end up being quality, but for different reasons, right? One can do more, one is better base. Does that make sense? Anyway, hopefully that gives you a little bit of information. It certainly gave me a little bit of information when I had this conversation on Patreon. Definitely helped me understand the process more and the materials more. With that, I'll be back next week. Thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. Until next time, take care.